left-hand side for Vieira, who will play it through to Gabriel Jesus, who's in here for Arsenal. Gabriel Jesus to finish it off. Oh, what a way to do it! Gabriel Jesus seals the points for Arsenal. He's back, and he's back with a bang.
Into the penalty area it goes. Gabriel's header, and it's into the back of the net. Arsenal take an early lead through Gabriel.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the daily Arsenal podcast with me, Harry Symeou.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope you're all good. Hope you're all well. Happy Monday and welcome back to another live episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. As always, we've got a fair bit of Arsenal chat to get through on this edition. We've got a few stories to touch upon. We're going to be focusing on Arsenal's US tour. We'll talk about the squad that is flying out there, whether we can really read into how they perform and the results that they produced whilst traveling around the States. We're also going to talk about Marseille's proposal for Eddie Nketiah, Nico Williams' future. We'll also discuss why the Calafiori deal is even more complicated than we thought it was yesterday. And we're going to talk Takehiro Tomiyasu. I'm really concerned about Takehiro Tomiyasu's ongoing fitness issues. And actually reading the news yesterday that he'd been left out of the squad and wasn't traveling because of another problem. And then reading a little bit later on in the day that he might miss the entire preseason. It's got me thinking quite a bit about the Japanese international defender's future. And I want to have a conversation about that as well. Plus, we'll take some of your questions and thoughts from the live chat as well. So lots and lots to get into, lots and lots to get through. If I could just ask you, if you're a regular viewer or listener, you'll know exactly what you're going to get here on the Chronicles of a Gooner. So please do leave me a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new. It really does help. We're on the road to 35,000 YouTube subscribers. I think we're about just over 400 away. So we could potentially get there in the next month if those of you that are watching and coming across the channel for the first time, who maybe aren't already subscribed, could do us a solid and hit the subscribe button. It really does help. Also, the likes really help as well. So I want to set a like target. If we could get to 500 likes on this, I'd be absolutely delighted. But that requires you guys to do the simple thing, which is click on that like symbol. It doesn't cost you a thing. It's completely free. If you want to support the podcast even more, you can go over to our Patreon link, which is in the description. And we've got a Patreon episode that I've been working on for a few days. I had an angle for an episode, and because of some news that came out, that angle was no longer relevant. So I've had to go back to the drawing board and restart on that episode. But I'm looking forward to sharing it with you, hopefully by about tomorrow lunchtime, all being well. But anyway, let's get into our first story today. We're going to start with Arsenal's US tour. Okay, so the Gunners have travelled out to the US to begin their US tour. It's something that the club have done over the last few years quite a bit in terms of going out to the States and playing a number of fixtures, giving our US supporter base the opportunity to watch the team live and in the flesh. And we know we've got an incredible following over there. So that's why going to the US on tour makes a lot of sense. I'm sure for KSE as well, our American ownership, it makes great business sense in that if they can grow their audience and expand their audience in a country where, they know the landscape very well, then it's only good for them. And yesterday, Arsenal announced the squad that will be traveling out there. And I'll just quickly read you through it. So you've got Karl Hein, Tommy Setford, who obviously just signed for the club officially yesterday, Lucas Nygaard, Alexei Rojas, those are the goalkeepers. Then you've got Ben White, Alexander Zinchenko, Jurien Timber, Josh Nichols, Jakub Kivior, Aidan Heaven, Omar Rekik, Thomas Partey, Jorginho, Mikhail Rosiak, Miles Lewis-Skelly, Martin Odegaard, Emil Smith-Rowe, Fabio Vieira, Ethan Nwaneri, Salah Oulad-Mahand, Jimmy Gower, Leandro Trossard, Reece Nelson, Charles Sago Jr., Gabriel Jesus, and Eddie Nketiah. I'm going to ask you one question. And I guess this is a question that is directed mainly at our American listeners, because I know there's loads of you that tune in and take in the podcast from stateside. Does that group of players, in terms of the names on that list? Do they inspire you? Now, we can't help the fact that this was a Euros year. It was a Copa America year. We can't help the fact that that's had a massive, massive issue, a massive impact, I should say, on the squad that we're able to send over to the US. And if you look at the squad that we sent last year, for example, it was much stronger. It looked much healthier. There was excitement around Declan Rice, who had just come in. There was excitement around, how Kai Havertz was going to look as well. Another player that not many people saw us signing, but in the end, we managed to get that deal done. I just look at this squad, and I did a little exercise last night where I compared it to the one last season. Obviously, Timber was a part of it, and he sort of was new at that point, and everybody was excited about it. And this one just feels really, really underwhelming. And I'm not saying that Arsenal are to blame for this, and I'm not saying that people should be angry at the club or anything like that, because, as I say, circumstances beyond our control have led to us only being able to take this group of players, and have meant that a load of the stars that a lot of you would have purchased tickets with the hope of seeing, they're just not available. They need holidays, they need breaks, and we need to take care of them as well. But it is a little bit underwhelming, and I do feel sorry for a lot of those supporters over there who maybe only get one chance a year to see the Arsenal play in the flesh, and that is, of course, when they travel stateside. So again, not pointing the finger at anyone, but I do look at that and I think it's a little bit underwhelming. And as a result of that, I think you got to be very, very careful how you look at this preseason tour, because you know what's going to happen if we go out there and we don't play particularly well and we end up losing games against sides that we either want to be competing with in sort of Liverpool and obviously Manchester United we're playing as well. Bournemouth are a side that you'd imagine will be quite far down the Premier League in comparison to us next season. And, if they beat us, then people are going to start talking and questioning that. The point I'm trying to make is don't read too much into the performances and don't read too much into the results. And I know that there are always those people every summer that do get a little bit bogged down by sort of the preseason results. I remember last season's result against Manchester United, or last preseason's result, and then look how far ahead of them we finished. So it doesn't really give you an indication of where you're at, and you have to factor in how many players we've got missing. It is an opportunity for us to look at some of the youngsters. As I read through that list, the names that jump out to me in terms of people I'm excited to see. Ethan Nwaneri, obviously, can't wait to see how he progresses as an Arsenal player moving forward. Charles Sago Jr. is an interesting one for me. Seen a bit of him at academy level. I'd quite like to see how he fares in this. Could it be his opportunity to break through? There's a couple of names in there as well that may not be Arsenal players come the end of the window. Emile Smith-Rowe, heavily linked with a move away. Same with Eddie Nketiah. Same with Reece Nelson. So there's a bit of that as well. A young lad who goes by the name of Aidan Heaven is someone I'm quite keen on seeing. Again, seen him a bit at academy level when I've covered games. And I know somebody that knows him quite well and has been telling me about him for a little while. So I'm excited to see how he fares as well moving forward. But yeah, look, it's a little bit underwhelming in terms of the squad that's travelled. But it's important to remember that these games are predominantly about building your fitness level. So I won't be obsessing over the results, and I don't think anyone should be really. What you're going to see in the United States, because of all the factors that we've just discussed, I just don't think is going to be an accurate representation of what Arsenal are or will be going into the 24-25 campaign. And I think as long as you can apply that context in your assessments, then you'll be fine. But anyway, just wanted to share my thoughts on that squad. It isn't looking great. I feel for those that have, spent a lot of money and based plans around going out to the US tour. Look, you're still going to have a great time. I'm not wishing to pee on your parade. You're going to have a great time because I know that for a lot of you, it's a great opportunity just to mix with other Gooners as well and get to mix with other Arsenal fans, because it's not like London where, we are all sort of within close proximity of one another. You probably went to school with fellow Arsenal fans and all the rest of it. I'm sure there will be a lot of you that live somewhere where there aren't that many Arsenal fans. So the sheer fact that you get to come together on these preseason tours is probably what it's mainly about. And obviously, if you get to see the stars in action, that's great as well. But yeah, not the most exciting traveling squad, but I'm sure you'll have a cracking time anyway. So yeah, make the most of it. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about Eddie Nketiah. We've been discussing this potential move to Marseille for a little while now, and we touched on whether or not that would be a good move for him. I said to you that, in my opinion, that could be the perfect move for Eddie Nketiah, and I really, really do believe that. It's interesting, though, because Fabrizio Romano put out something in which he said that Marseille were preparing a proposal that was going to come Arsenal's way, and that this is a thing. There is a serious interest from the French outfit in Arsenal striker. Ryan Taylor has reported that Marseille are working on a loan deal for Eddie Nketiah. That includes an obligation to buy him at the end of that. The opening proposal submitted last week fell short of Arsenal's valuation, but at least kick-started negotiations between the clubs, and Nketiah has travelled with Arsenal to the USA. So, look, in an ideal world, looking at the fact that he's a centre forward, the fact that he is at the age that he is, the fact that, we're looking at him as one of our most sellable assets at the moment. In an ideal world, you want to get that money in the door straight away. You want to be able to reinvest it. You want to be able to draw a line under the entire Eddie Nketiah thing. If it's an obligation to buy on Marseille's side of things, it would literally be them just kicking the can down the road, basically not seeking to spend the money now, but obviously securing a deal that they will then have to honor in the future. I'd like us to go and sell him now. I'd like that to be done. I'd like him to have that line drawn under things so that he can move on with his career, because I really do believe Eddie Nketiah is a decent striker and that he could succeed at a lot of big clubs. Maybe not the very elite clubs, your Arsenals, your Real Madrids, your Man Cities, in terms of levels that these teams are performing at now. But he is a good striker, and I actually think French football could be a good landing spot for him. I would search around. I would, listen to offers, listen to conversations, entertain conversations. And if there was a deal that allowed us to get all our money in on Eddie Nketiah and draw a line under this straight away, I would do it. But if doing that is less lucrative than allowing him to join Marseille on loan and then having them exercise that obligation to buy him later down the line, then maybe it doesn't really matter. I mean, the guarantee of having that money come in 12 months down the line, it still puts you in a financial position of strength. It still puts you in a position where you can plan, as long as it's all done properly and there's no way of Marseille wriggling out of that. So as long as it's legally watertight, then does it really matter if you get the money 12 months down the line? I don't think it's going to have too much of an impact on what we're able to do in terms of going out and spending, etc. We know that when we sign players, we don't always pay for them up front and in their entirety. Sometimes it will be based around a structure, etc., etc. So, look, a loan with an obligation to buy is not my ideal outcome here, but it's not something I'm dead against either, because I think it can still work for the club. And if you're going to lose money just because you want a quick sale, but you don't actually desperately need that money in to fund your current business, then maybe you accept something like this. And look, it depends on Eddie Nketiah as well. If Eddie Nketiah really, really wants it, really, really wants that move to Marseille, and someone else is coming in who's offering similar amount but wants to pay the money up front, or at least complete the permanent transfer straight away, then I think you do have to take into consideration the player in this circumstance. Eddie Nketiah has been kept around at Arsenal for a long, long time. He's been told, you're part of our plans. He's been given a 5-year contract. He was convinced to sign that 5-year contract, even when it looked like he might be about to go on his way. But then over time, he's gradually fallen further and further down the pecking order. And you can't really say it's because of his performances, because the truth is he hasn't had many chances over the last 6 to 8 months. So it's largely because the team have gone in a different direction. It's largely because Mikel Arteta has opted for something different in centre forward. And Eddie Nketiah has fallen by the wayside as a result of that. So I think as a club, we kind of owe it to him to entertain what he wants. I'm not saying that that's going to be the deciding factor. Like, you only do a deal, based on what Eddie Nketiah wants. But it's something that should be taken into consideration, I think. Like, if, for example, let's say Marseille are offering 20 million euros in terms of the obligation to buy, and let's say Nice come in with 18 million euros, but Nice want to pay it straight away. I think Arsenal at least owe it to Eddie Nketiah to hear him out and listen to what he wants, and then try, if it works for them as well, of course, because we are a football club that has its needs and has its requirements, then I think we should at least listen to what he has to say and wherever possible facilitate the move that he wants. Because this is a kid, in my opinion, who I don't want to say we've led down the garden path, because that's not fair. He's been playing at a huge football club. He's been earning a really healthy salary. But he would have been told that he was going to get way more opportunities than he did. That's why he would have signed the contract, the 5-year contract, the much maligned 5-year contract that he did. And so I think we owe him to try and make what he wants work, if it can work for us as well. But interesting sort of development on that it is going to be a loan with an obligation to buy, or at least that's what Marseille is starting with. Let's keep a close eye on that one and see how it goes. Zamoud says Eddie needs to show Marseille what he can do in pre-season. That's the thing. Like, I don't think what you're going to see in pre-season is going to give you too much in terms of what you can expect from Arsenal as a collective going into the 24-25 season. But there are a few players on that list that I mentioned. If we just go back to that list, your Jakob Kiviors, your Emile Smith-Rowe, your Reece Nelsons, your Eddie Nketiah. It's an opportunity for those guys to put themselves in the shop window as much as it is anything else. So, yeah, let's see, of course, how that goes. Anyway, let's move on to our next one. Remember, if you haven't done so already, leave a like on the video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. It really, really does help. And if you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review. On to our next story. Any small hope that some Arsenal fans may have had of us stealing in and signing the Spanish wing sensation Nico Williams appeared to be fading away as Barcelona continued to push for the 22-year-old. Fabrizio Romano tweeted this earlier on. Barcelona are only focused on Nico Williams. This remains the clear plan, with more contract talks scheduled this week to get the green light on personal terms. After meeting Nico Williams' agent last week, Deco has a new round of talks ready. Other targets will be discussed after the Nico Williams deal. So Barcelona very, very, very much making Nico Williams their priority at the moment. And as I say, any hope that some Arsenal fans had of us stealing in at the last minute, triggering the release clause and prizing him to the Emirates Stadium are fading day by day. And I've kind of made my peace with that myself. He was a player that I looked at pre-Euros and I thought, oh, that's an interesting player. And then I had a look at him, and then I looked at some of the numbers and the underlying metrics and watched my fair share of compilations and clips. And I thought, yeah, he looks like a really useful player, but it feels like something's missing. It feels like that end product isn't always there in terms of finishing, that his decision-making isn't always as good as it could be. That's not to say he was ever bad, but it's just not at the level that it could be, and that there's potential there. And so I kept saying, if the price was right and the contract terms were right, then maybe I'd do it. But it wasn't one I was desperate to do. And then I went to the Euros. Then I turned up and I watched him in the flesh on a couple of occasions, playing for Spain against Germany and, of course, against England in the final. And I thought he was fantastic. And I followed this tournament really, really closely because we knew that there were those links to Arsenal. I'm not surprised that Barcelona are accelerating on this. I'm not surprised that Barcelona are trying to get this deal over the line as quickly as possible to fend off any potential interest from others. I think this is a massive power play from Joan Laporta. I think we discussed this on a recent episode where I said that for someone who's looking at his biggest rivals, Real Madrid, who are winning everything at the moment, who have just signed Kylian Mbappe, have just added Endrick to their ranks as well, being able to kind of reunite the Nico Williams or bring back together that pairing with Lamine Yamal on the flanks would be a big political win for Joan Laporta, as well as something that would improve Barcelona's team. So you can understand why he'll be desperate to do this. And it feels like they are much further down the line, barring a big surprise, than anybody else. So Nico Williams looks like he's Barcelona bound. So if you thought that he was coming to Arsenal, you had any hope, perhaps it's time for us to let that go. Okay, we're going to take a really, really short pause. And when we return, we're going to come back with more stories. We've still got some Calafiori chat. And I want to speak to you guys at length about Takehiro Tomiyasu and my concerns around the Japanese international.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
You heard the man. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on Spotify, Apple, or whatever. Please do leave us a like, subscribe, all the rest of it. Check us out on Patreon. And your reviews are very, very much appreciated as well. Okay, let's move on then. We're going to talk Riccardo Calafiori again. Deal still not done, not officially. According to Fabrizio Romano, Arsenal and Bologna have their agreement in place. And the problem now is between Basel and Bologna. And there is a negotiation ongoing with regards to the makeup of that sell-on clause. So how are Bologna going to pay it? Are they going to pay it in installments? Are they going to pay it in one lump sum? That's what we understand is being negotiated between Bologna and Basel at the moment. But hold on, because the plot thickens. Last night at 9:45, there was a report from Get Italian Football News, which was citing a piece from Gazzetta in Italy that said Roma are now sniffing around for some money as well. Roma and Basel are set for a legal battle because of Riccardo Calafiori's move to Arsenal. Roma also want a percentage of Basel's sell-on fee. So there's not just one club now seeking to gain financial reward from selling Calafiori. There's not just two in Bologna and Basel. We now have a third club in the mix. And that is, of course, his former club, Roma. Now, he was sent away from Roma by Jose Mourinho. He was a number of players that he was one of a number of players, I should say, that Jose Mourinho wasn't impressed by. He sent him away. Calafiori's spoken quite a bit about this since and said, I don't really have an issue with Jose Mourinho. It is what it is. But yeah, it's just funny, isn't it? Because Roma was so quick to ship him off and they sent him to Basel and people wondered where he was going to go from there. He eventually worked hard and got his move back to Italian football. And now he's one of the hottest properties in Italian football. And all of a sudden, Roma are sitting there with their hand held out, waiting for something to come in as a result of this transaction taking place. I don't know the ins and outs of that. I don't really understand on what grounds Roma think that they can claim money. I fully understand why Basel are digging their heels in and will not accept anything less than the sell-on clause that they agreed with Bologna. The structure, someone said to me, shouldn't the structure have been worked out already? And I spoke to someone yesterday, a former colleague of mine who's way more across the whole contract renewal process, transfer process than I am. And he said to me, look, at times there will be clauses, sell-on clauses in contracts, but it doesn't always mean that the makeup or the structure of those sell-on clauses is also on paper. And so sometimes, it will say that they're due to receive 50% of the total sale value, but then there is a negotiation that needs to take place. So basically, long story short, what he was telling me is that it's not unusual for two clubs to be discussing how a sell-on clause is going to be paid. So it feels like that, this is taking an age, and maybe that's because we probably got wind of it a little bit earlier than I think anybody involved would have liked. But it's not uncommon for sell-on clauses to be discussed in terms of their structure. So yeah, don't worry too much about that. But also, I just want to say, when it comes to Roma and Basel, which is a whole different argument and a whole different issue, guys, you go and sort it out among yourselves. Let us get the deal done, and you guys can sit there and you guys can thrash it out between you. Take it through the courts. Let it take months if you want. Just let us get our player so that we can integrate him in the group as soon as possible, so that he's ready for the new season as soon as possible, because that's really, really important, particularly with the volume of players that we've got away at the moment. I think the priority is, of course, you want to strengthen the squad this summer, but you also need to get people back as soon as possible. And we need to remember that we've got a pretty good team, and we need that team functioning from the very off, because as we've seen in recent years, there's very little margin for error when you're in title races with Manchester City. Okay, moving on, we're going to talk Takehiro Tomiyasu. Takehiro. One of my favorite players in terms of likability. I think he's so likable. I think he's so hardworking. I think he gives it 100% all the time. And I love that about Tomiyasu. I love that he's versatile. I love that he can plug so many different holes for us. I think he's the versatility king is how I would put it. But we're at a point where you can't possibly build plans around him. And that is a real shame, I think. All the talk since we heard that Arsenal were in for Riccardo Calafiori has been around what does that mean for Jakub Kiwior? Is it time to move Kiwior on? I myself have sat here on this podcast and said that Calafiori to me is an upgrade on Jakub Kiwior. He's the one that we've all put under the microscope in light of this news. But given what we heard yesterday, and that is that Takehiro Tomiyasu will miss potentially the entirety of Arsenal's pre-season preparations after sustaining a knee injury. Is it time that we talked about him as the one that needs replacing? It's a knee injury, as has been reported by a number of people after Arsenal, of course, confirmed that themselves. And it was pointed out by James Benge that there's no timescale attached to this injury. So we don't know exactly how long it's going to be before he's back. But CBS Sports sources indicate that the initial estimates have him sidelined for 2 to 3 weeks. Well, if it's 3 weeks, is he going to get a preseason game before the season starts? Probably not. So I'm really concerned and really worried about this. I have to say, look, all the talk has been of Kiwior going, of Zinchenko going. And, you know, I think we can all agree that we prefer to have Tomiyasu at left back than Kiwior because he's a slightly better defender. And when he was available again, that was what Mikel Arteta seemed to prefer as well. But how much longer do we persist with Tomiyasu because of these issues? Like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up his page on Transfermarkt, because I really do want to have a look at this so that I can provide you some numbers and context around what I'm saying. So it doesn't sound like an angry Arsenal fan just ranting about a player picking up an injury. He is, of course, 25 years old. He did sign an improved deal back in March 2020, but there wasn't a lot of time added to that. His contract expires in 2 years, so it's not like Arsenal went really long on the term. And I think that was partly because they were worried about his injury history. What they did was offer him improved terms, which I think better reflected his role in the squad. But the injury stuff, you know, it's a real concern when it comes to Takehiro Tomiyasu. You can just see from this map here that he's capable of covering every position across the back four, which is why he is a valuable player when fit and available. And it's why Arsenal went out and got him in the first place. It's why when he's available, he gets used a fair bit. But just have a look at this. Just have a look at the injury history. This is something to be concerned about, guys. Knee problems, and I'm only focusing on his Arsenal days here. In June 2021, saw him unavailable. That was the season where it all went wild because of, was it the COVID season? I can't remember. Anyway, but he's had knee problems. 21-22, he had a calf injury that saw him miss 11 games, saw him miss 60 days, so 2 months essentially of football. In the 22-23 season, he had to have knee surgery, which saw him miss 107 days, totaling around about 16 games. And in the 23-24 season, the season that just finished, he had 2 stints out, one 27 days long through December, which was a really crucial period, and one that was 44 days long, which stretched from the beginning of February right through until towards the end of March. So I'm not wrong in thinking that Takehiro Tomiyasu has missed a lot of football for Arsenal. The numbers are there for you to see. I also don't sit here and say we need to sell him and we need to get rid of him, because I do appreciate his value when he is available to us. But does it feel a little bit harsh, the fact that everybody's talking about Jakub Kiwior, moving him on, and the fact that Calafiori coming in knocks him even further down the pecking order? And should we actually be focusing on a guy that in truth is barely available for us? Should we be focusing on him instead? And should we be looking at him and thinking, Calafiori, versatile, not quite as versatile as Tomiyasu, because I think he's a left-sided player, whereas Tomiyasu has shown that he's comfortable playing right or left. So it's not quite the same. But should we be looking at Tomiyasu as the one who's closest to the exit door because of the problems that he seems to have with injuries? I don't know. I just think it's really, really difficult for a manager to plan and to build a squad around players that just have this tendency to break down as often as this guy does. I mean, again, I'll reinforce my point. He's an excellent footballer. He's got so much going for him. Physically, he's great. He's powerful in the air. As a fullback, he's almost impossible to drop the ball over the top of because of his athleticism and speed and aerial ability when, of course, he's fit. But those moments where he's fully fit are so few and far between that I'm starting to question whether it is worth keeping a hold of Takehiro Tomiyasu. In the past, I've said that, players that come from the Serie A into the Premier League will struggle with the physical level. And I think with Tomiyasu, if you looked at him, you would have seen someone that, that clearly looks the part in terms of his physical build. But actually, if we scratch beneath the surface, he had injury problems at Bologna too. If you go back to the 1920 season, he had 2 stints on the sidelines, one 36 days and one 40 days. And both of them were hamstring muscular injuries. And then you look through and you've got more muscular problems and you've got calf injuries and then another calf injury and then another calf injury. And in between all of that, you've had knee surgery. You start to ask the question, don't you? The question of, will Takehiro Tomiyasu ever be fit enough to play a big, big role in this squad? And fortunately, defensively, we've got enough cover for it not to have been a mega, mega problem for us last season. The season before it was, because when we lost him, we lost the inability to use Ben White inside. And when we lost the ability to use Ben White inside and we picked up the Saliba injury, we had to go with, at first, Rob Holding and then Jakub Kiwior. And that really cost us. Last season, it wasn't so bad because we had more options and we were able to keep Saliba and Gabriel fit for the entire season. And then, obviously, Ben White had a great record even when he was not 100%. And the only real issues that we had were on the left-hand side at times. But I think this is something that we need to seriously consider now. And I'm not saying that he's not a better defender than Jakub Kiwior, because if we went away to Manchester City tomorrow and one of them had to be in the team and was tasked with keeping people quiet and doing his defensive duties and role, I would pick Tomiyasu every single day of the week. But because of the situation with his fitness, I do wonder if he should be the one, as I keep saying, that should be closer to the exit door than Jakub Kiwior, who everybody's talking about. Sia says in the chat, I think from a commercial perspective, we're likely to get more for Kiwior right now than we stand to get from a Tommy sale. Tommy can play multiple positions, which is great cover for our backline. Yeah, I think that's right too. But then you have to frame it that way, mate. Like, we have to say that from a purely business perspective, it probably makes sense to sell Kiwior over Tomiyasu. But in terms of who deserves to be, and deserves is probably the wrong word because it's not his fault that he's picking up these injuries. But if you're Jakub Kiwior, you're probably looking at it and thinking, how am I further down the pecking order than him when he's never available? I'm always available. I'm always ready to go. I'm always ready to step in and help the team where possible. Yet, if one of us is going to leave, it's going to be me. Or at least that's how the fans have framed it up. And actually, I'm more available to this team and probably more help to the team as a result of that. So, yeah, I get it. Afsar says, normally footballers from East Asia are never injured. So why is Tommy always injured? I'm confused. Should he be sold, but who will sign him? Yeah, I mean, look, I think there'll be a lot of clubs on the continent that would look at Takehiro Tomiyasu. I don't think that you'd get mega money for him, but I don't see why you couldn't get 15 million euros, 20 million euros for him. And I don't think you get that much more for Jakub Kiwior, which kind of goes against what some of the other points are that have been made in the chat. But yeah, look, in an ideal world, I keep both of them and keep building the depth, because I think if you keep all of them and you have added Riccardo Calafiori, your defense is completed. Like, literally, it's completed. I don't think it gets much more stacked than that in terms of being reasonable around what you can expect in the volume of players. So I'd like to keep them both, but I just find it a bit strange. And I only really started thinking about this yesterday, that all the talk has been around Kiwior and what might happen to him if Calafiori comes in, when actually we've got another player who is part of our defense that just cannot stay fit. And I think, look, if I heard midway through the season that Tomiyasu picked up a knee injury because he was playing a lot and he was on his feet, like, dead on his feet, I should say, and he'd been really overexerted, etc., then I'd go, okay, frustrating, annoying, but we know he's an injury-prone player, and we've run him down into the ground recently. It was coming. It was going to happen. I think the frustration here is almost exacerbated by the fact that this has come in pre-season when all you're doing is training. So I think that's playing a part in, at least in my mindset. I can't speak for everyone else. But yeah, it just got me thinking yesterday, and I thought I'd raise that on today's show. We're going to take some questions and thoughts before we wrap up. We'll do around about 5-6 minutes more. So if you've got any questions on anything that we've discussed or anything else that you want to touch on, then please do let me know. Let me just check in where we're at on the likes, because we really, really do need likes on the board, particularly on YouTube. We're nowhere near the target that we set at the start of the show. So if you haven't done so already, please do leave a like. It really, really does help. It doesn't cost you a thing, but it helps me so much. Okay, we're going to take your questions right after this. Okay, let's have a look at the live chat box. Pro Migrant says, Harry, should Calafiori's injury history be a concern? Yeah, it should. We talked about it on the breakdown episode that we done of him. I called it the breakdown, but we call it the scouting report. But I broke it down, basically, my thoughts on Riccardo Calafiori. And I've since read some more about this knee injury that he suffered. And it was described as the kind of injury that you'd suffer in like motorsport, coming off of a motorbike. That's how people were looking at it at that point and at that time. And the fact that he's been able to do what he's done since is seen by a lot of medical professionals as something of a miracle. I do think we should be concerned, and I do think that should have been factored into what we were willing to spend. But I also think Arsenal will have done their due diligence and tried to, or will, at least when they get to the medical stage, to try and make sure that there's not any huge risks they're taking there. In a weird way. So what happened was, do you know what? I might have a screenshot of the article that I was reading, because I think I might have sent it to a friend of mine. Here we go. So this is what was said at the time. Astonishingly, and this is with regards to Calafiori's injury, all the ligaments had been ruptured, including the meniscus and articular capsule. Something like this usually only happens in motorsport, not in football. So that was how it was described. In a weird way, and I'm no medical professional, but in a weird way, when something like that happens, when like a ligament is ruptured and then it's obviously healed, as long as it heals properly, that might actually be something that's easier to overcome than recurring muscle issues like what we've been talking about with Tomiyasu. Because it's clear, like in Tomiyasu's case, it's there's an issue with muscular stuff with him in particular, right? Because if you look through this list, hamstring injury, calf injury, hamstring injury, calf injury, calf injury, calf injury. Yes, he's had knee surgery, but most of his problems and most of his long stints on the sidelines have been to do with muscular problems. So I'm not saying that I'm a medical expert or that I understand the ins and outs of this stuff, but what I am saying is that there will be certain injuries that provide red flags, and there will be certain injuries that people might look at, medical professionals might look at and think, well, as long as they're treated properly, it's not something we should be too concerned about in the future. And I just wonder if in Calafiori's situation, that's what they're thinking, and that's why they've been okay to kind of to move forward in their attempts to sign him, and maybe wouldn't do so for others. I don't know. Just a thought, just a theory. Guitar Solo says, how are we trying to move on Kiwior when he hasn't played in his preferred position and he played well when we were unbeaten earlier in the year? Yeah, he played okay at left back. He done an okay job. But you say that he hasn't played in his preferred position, and I agree with that. And a lot of my defense of Jakub Kiwior last season, when he was getting quite a bit of stick actually about, you know, what he was doing at left back and how awkward he looked at times when he was coming in field and trying to make things happen. One of the things I constantly said was, judge him when he plays at left centre back, right? But he isn't going to get that many opportunities because he's nowhere near as good as Gabriel. And if Riccardo Calafiori comes in, then I would argue that he moves below him as well in terms of left centre-back options. So on that basis, I think a lot of the reason people are saying that maybe Kiwior should move on, or that's one that we should be looking to sell if we can get the right money in for, a lot of that is to do with the fact that they believe that with Calafiori's arrival, he's going to get even less opportunity to play in his preferred position, in which case, what's the point? But I agree with you that we haven't seen the maximum or the best of Jakub Kiwior, largely because he's rarely been able to play in his preferred position. When he did have a very brief run at centre-back, he was playing on the right side of a back four, which probably doesn't suit him down to the ground either. Matt says, Harry, what are your non-Arsenal wild predictions or hot takes for next season? That's a really tough one, you know. Really, really tough one. I think you're going to see drop-offs from a few sides that I don't think anybody anticipates dropping off. I think Villa are going to be one of them. I think balancing Champions League football is going to be difficult for them. I think that maybe it's tough, you know. It's tough because I haven't actually thought about this in advance. I'm sure when we do a season preview, I'll spend some time on this kind of stuff and rack my brains. But I think Villa would be my hot take at the moment in terms of I don't think they're going to cope as well with the Champions League schedule as maybe some people think or hope. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, you got me thinking. You got my brain ticking, Matt. I really don't know. I'm sorry to give you a shit answer, but I'll have to think about this and come back to you. iGrow says, why do you think the Ivan Toney talk has died down? Is he linked to another club? I just don't think anybody wants to pay anywhere near Brentford's valuation of the player because of the baggage that comes with, you know, his ban and all the rest of it. I know that he served that ban and he's back now, and to a degree you have to draw a line under it and move on. But I think that would have put a lot of clubs off at a time where he was really, really hot property. And then I add into the equation the fact that I don't think he was that great when he did return. Now, I'm not going to go too big on that because I think that for me, somebody who doesn't play for 6 months cannot possibly be expected to come back in and hit the ground running and be excellent without a bit of time to get back into the swing of things. But I just think a combination of those factors, so the ban and then maybe the dip in form, if you want to call it that, has seen his stock fall. And that's why I always say sometimes when you're selling players as a football club, you need to do it when their stock is really high, and you need to wait for the or you don't need to wait, or you shouldn't wait until the downward trajectory begins, because once it does, it's very difficult to turn that trajectory back around. I've never been a big fan of his. I've never been someone that's said we should sign him. You will know that if you listen to this regularly, and my opinion hasn't really changed, to be honest. Going to take a couple more questions before we go. Derek asks, why are we buying or why are we bringing in more damaged goods in terms of injury-prone players? As for the medical guys to decide. I think as a footballer, we all know that Riccardo Calafiori is extremely talented. There are concerns, of course, about a previous injury that he suffered, and it'd be naive of us not to mention that or take that into consideration. But yeah, you just kind of got to trust the team that are overseeing this stuff. And if it goes wrong and he is unavailable for long periods of time due to related injuries, then we can sit there and we can pull them apart at that point and we can criticize. But I'm always reluctant to kind of stick the boot in on someone before something's actually gone wrong. So I don't want to do that just yet. Safe Hands Chris says, which youngsters do you think could surprise us in pre-season? I mean, we all know that Ethan Nwaneri is a huge talent. He's the one, as I said earlier, that I'm most excited to see play. I'm interested to have a good look, though, at Charles Sago Jr. as well. I think he's an exciting wide player. I think he's one that is kind of knocking on the door. Not to say that he comes into our team as a first teamer, but he's knocking on the door between academy football and senior football. And I feel like this is the chance or the time where he really needs to show something in order to take that next step, whether that be at Arsenal or anywhere else. But he's one I'm quite keen on seeing. And I'm keen on seeing Aiden Heaven as well, because he looks big, tall, physical, powerful, and really, really comfortable in possession. So let's see how he gets on. Hopefully he gets some minutes as well. Okay, I am going to leave it there, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. There are over 1,000 of you watching us live right now across the multiple platforms, which is incredible. Please, if you're watching on YouTube, leave us a like. It really, really does help. Let's try and hit that 500 like target. If you're listening on audio, then subscribe and leave us a review. You know the drill by now. Follow me on all the socials. The links are in the description below, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a great Monday. Goodbye.